He had been 9 years old when he first heard it. Not heard it in the way that you hear things that are in the background, that pass through the ear without landing. Heard it the way certain sounds land on certain people at certain ages when the conditions are exactly right, and the thing that is heard goes all the way in and does not come back out, becomes part of how the interior is arranged, part of the furniture of the self, one of the things that is just there from then on, present, whether you are thinking about it or not. The sound was Chuck Berry's guitar, the specific attack of it, the specific rhythm of it, the way the notes came not as individual events, but as a continuous motion, like water moving over rock, like something that had been going on before you heard it and would go on after you stopped listening. He had heard it from the radio in the kitchen of the house on Randolph Street in Freehold, New Jersey, on an afternoon in 1959 when he was 9 years old and had not yet touched a guitar and did not know that he was going to spend the rest of his life touching one. He did not know any of that. He just knew that what was coming out of the radio was the most important sound he had ever heard. It was Johnny B. Good. He would not know the title until later. The radio announcer had not said it, or had said it, and he had not yet attached names to the things that were rearranging his interior. Because you do not need a name for the thing that is changing you while it is in the process of changing you. You just need to be present for it. He was present for it. He stood in the kitchen on Randolph Street and listened to Chuck Berry play guitar on the radio. And something in him that had been waiting for this specific signal received it. And the waiting was over. 3 years later, at 12, he held a guitar for the first time. His mother had rented it for him from a local music shop, a second-hand instrument, nothing special, the kind of guitar that exists in the inventory of music shops in working-class towns, because it is the guitar that families like his can afford, not cheap enough to be worthless and not expensive enough to matter to anyone who had a choice. He held it and put his fingers on the strings and played the 3 chords he had been shown, and this sounded like nothing, like the distance between what he heard in his head and what came out of his hands, which was enormous, which was the entire distance between the music on the radio and the music available to a 12-year-old in Freehold who had been playing for 5 minutes. He kept going anyway. He kept going because the sound he had heard at 9 was still in him, still present, still the organizing principle of what he wanted and what he was trying to reach. He learned the Chuck Berry songs note by note, in the way that you learn things when the only tools you have are repetition and determination, and the willingness to be bad at something for as long as it takes to stop being bad at it. He learned Johnny B. Good. He learned Roll Over Beethoven. He learned Sweet Little 16 and Maybelline and Carol and all the songs that Chuck Berry had written in the decade before Bruce Springsteen was born, that had established definitively what rock and roll was and what it was capable of saying and how it was supposed to sound. He learned them in his bedroom in Freehold, with the record on the turntable and the guitar in his hands, playing the record and then playing the guitar, and then playing the record again to find the gap. And over the years, the gap closed, and eventually the thing he had heard at 9 in the kitchen on Randolph Street and the thing he could produce with his own hands were the same thing, or close enough to the same thing that the difference no longer mattered in the way it had mattered at the beginning. 27 years later, Bruce Springsteen walked on stage with Chuck Berry. It was September 1986. The occasion was the closing of the Fox Theater in St. Louis, Missouri, a benefit show organized around Chuck Berry, who was 60 years old that year, whose birthday would be celebrated by the concert that Keith Richards had been organizing, that would eventually become the documentary film Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll. The concert itself was not the documentary. The documentary came later, was assembled from footage of rehearsals and the show itself, and the interviews and conversations that Keith Richards conducted with Chuck Berry during the period of preparation. The show that September was simply the show. Chuck Berry on stage at the Fox Theater in St. Louis, with a band of people who had all arrived at what they were because of what Chuck Berry had done. Bruce Springsteen was one of those people. He had been asked to participate months before the show, and he had said yes in the way he said yes to things that required no deliberation, immediately, without the negotiation of schedules or the calculation of what the appearance would or would not do for his career, at a moment when his career was at a particular point. He said yes because it was Chuck Berry, and because you said yes to Chuck Berry, and because any other answer would have been a kind of lie about what his life had been and where his music had come from. In the months between saying yes and the night of the show, he thought about it more than he expected to. Not with anxiety. He was not anxious about performing, had not been anxious about performing since his early 20s, when the anxiety had been replaced by something that was closer to its opposite, the specific calm of someone who has done something enough times to know that the doing of it is where they belong. He thought about it with something more interior than anxiety, something that was closer to what you feel when you are approaching a thing that has been large in your life for a long time, and the distance between you and it is closing. He thought about the kitchen on Randolph Street. He thought about being 9 years old and hearing something come out of a radio that told him something he had not known before and could not unknow after. He thought about all the years between that moment and this one, the bars in Asbury Park, the steel mill, the E Street Band finding its form in the clubs on the shore, Born to Run, and the 2 magazine covers in the same week, and all the years since, the stadiums and the tours, and the records, and the accumulated weight of a career that had been built from the inside out, from the music outward, with Chuck Berry's guitar as one of the original load-bearing elements. He was going to stand on stage with the source. He had met Chuck Berry before, in the specific way that musicians at different career stages meet each other, across the distances that fame and age and the different scales of their public presence create, the brief exchanges of people who have been in the same place at the same time and have acknowledged each other's presence. He knew who Chuck Berry was in the way that everyone knew who Chuck Berry was. He did not know Chuck Berry in the way that you know someone with whom you have stood on stage and played. He was going to know him that way now. The rehearsals for the Fox Theater show were, by most accounts of the people who were present for them, an experience that ranged from exhilarating to genuinely difficult. Chuck Berry was Chuck Berry, which meant that he was a man who had been doing what he did on his own terms for 30 years, and who had developed, over those 30 years, an approach to collaboration that was not exactly collaborative in the conventional sense. He played what he played when he played it, and the musicians around him were expected to find where they fit in that, and to do so without extensive prior discussion, because Chuck Berry's music had not been made by extensive prior discussion, and was not going to be remade that way now. Bruce Springsteen, standing in the rehearsal room in the days before the show, felt the specific disorientation of someone who has been in control of his musical environment for long enough that the absence of control is a noticeable sensation. He adjusted. He listened. He found in the listening what he had always found in Chuck Berry's music when he had encountered it on records and on radio. The thing that had reached him at 9 years old and had not released him since. The thing that was still there, that had always been there, that was, in some essential sense, the thing itself. The night of the show came. Bruce stood in the wings of the Fox Theater in St. Louis and waited for his cue. The Fox was a movie palace built in 1929, the kind of theater that the 1920s knew how to build, extravagant, ornamented, its ceilings painted and its walls gilded, designed with the specific intention of making the people inside it feel that they had entered a place of a different order than the ordinary world outside, a place where what happened on the stage was happening in a setting commensurate with its importance. The Fox had 4,174 seats. They were full. He could hear Chuck Berry on stage. He could hear the guitar, the specific sound of it, the specific attack, the specific way the notes moved, that he had first heard at 9 years old in a kitchen in Freehold, New Jersey, coming now from the stage 20 feet away, filtered through the walls of the theater, and through the crowd, and through the specific acoustics of a 1929 picture palace, and through 27 years of having that sound be one of the constants of his interior life. He thought about his father. His father had been in the kitchen on Randolph Street in 1959, not listening to the radio specifically, doing whatever people do in kitchens in the late afternoon, the ordinary activity of a man in a house at the end of a working day. His father had not been changed by the sound the way Bruce had been changed by it. His father had heard it and continued what he was doing. But his father was the world the sound had come from, the working-class Jersey world, the factory town world, the world of men who worked with their hands and came home tired, and were not asked by the culture around them whether they had feelings about this. The world that Chuck Berry had addressed with a directness and a joy and a physical energy that had not existed in popular music before Chuck Berry put it there. He thought, I'm about to walk onto a stage with the man who gave that world a sound. His cue came. He walked out. The lights hit him, and the sound hit him, and the crowd hit him. The specific combination of stimuli that Bruce Springsteen had been walking into for 20 years. The familiar coordinates of a concert stage, the things that his body knew without his mind needing to tell it anything. He knew how to be on a stage. He had known how to be on a stage for a long time. And then, Chuck Berry. Not physically, Chuck Berry was 10 feet to his left, playing, not moving toward him. But the presence of him, the specific physical reality of the man who had made the sounds that had been in Bruce Springsteen's body for 27 years, standing in the same physical space, on the same boards, under the same lights. The man who had been, for the entirety of Bruce Springsteen's musical life, something that existed in recordings and in the memories of people who had seen him live and in the specific mythology that attaches to the people who start things, who was now here, now real, now 10 feet to his left, making the exact sounds that had come out of a kitchen radio in Freehold in 1959. Bruce Springsteen had played on stages with a lot of people over 20 years. He had played with musicians whose talent was extraordinary, whose presence on stage changed the quality of the music being made, whose contribution to the East Street Band's sound was something he thought about and appreciated and could articulate in specific terms. He was not unfamiliar with the experience of playing with someone remarkable. This was different from that. This was the source, not a source, the source, the point of origin of the specific musical language that he had spent his entire adult life speaking, that he had learned in his bedroom in Freehold and refined in the bars in Asbury Park, and deployed in the arenas and stadiums of 20 years of touring, regardless of how it had developed and how far it had traveled from the original, still recognizably descended from what Chuck Berry had invented in the 1950s. He played. He did what he was there to do. He played the Chuck Berry songs that had been in his body since he was 9 years old, that he had learned note by note in his bedroom in Freehold, and had played in the bars in Asbury Park, and had carried through every year of everything that had followed. He played them next to the man who had written them. It was not the best performance he had ever given. He said this afterward, in the understated way he talked about things that had cost him something, that he had been so inside his own feeling about the occasion that the pure execution of the music had not been what it might have been in a more neutral emotional environment. He was not neutral. He was the opposite of neutral. He was the 9-year-old in the kitchen on Randolph Street, and the 16-year-old learning the guitar parts note by note in his bedroom, and the 20-year-old playing Johnny B. Good in the Stone Pony to a crowd of 30 people, and the 36-year-old standing on a stage in St. Louis with the man who had written the song that had started all of it, playing it next to him, hearing the guitar that had come out of a radio in 1959, coming from a human being 10 feet to his left. He was all of those people at once, which is what happens when something that has been large in your life for a long time finally arrives in the present tense. When the set ended, when the music stopped, and the crowd rose, and the lights came up, Bruce Springsteen stood on the stage of the Fox Theater in St. Louis and felt something that he would later try to describe to the people who asked him about that night. That he had been moved not by the performance, but by the proximity, by the specific physical fact of having been in the same room and on the same stage and making the same music as the man who had handed him, without knowing it, on an afternoon in 1959 through a kitchen radio, the thing that his life had been organized around ever since. He felt standing there like something had been completed, not finished, completed. The difference being that finished implies an ending, and this was not an ending. It was the closing of a loop, the arrival at a place that had been implicit in the beginning, but that required the whole of the distance between the beginning and now to reach. He had been 9 years old when he first heard it. He was 36 years old when he stood next to it on a stage. The distance between those two moments was everything he had become. If this story reached you where it needed to, subscribe and leave a comment. Tell us about the thing you heard when you were young that organized everything that came after. Share this with someone who understands what it means to finally stand next to the source of something that changed your life. Hit the bell, because we have more stories from the moments when music closes a circle that opened decades before. This was one of those moments.